She told me with a smile that it was better if we were just friends, but when she found out that someone else would take her place on the trip we had planned, her idea of friendship changed drastically, and the smile vanished. She thought she could have both, my stability and an adventure with someone else. Until the moment the adventure became the only thing she had. And the stability was about to sail to the Mediterranean. With me. And without her. 3 years of my life funding her dreams. And in the end, the only investment that really paid off was getting rid of her. My name is Yen. I met ABA during the last semester of my master's. I was finishing my studies in civil engineering at Holmes Hopkins, and she was studying interior design, dreaming of opening her own consulting firm. From the start, I was captivated by that creative energy, by her ambition to turn ordinary spaces into true works of art. She was magnetic. We started dating soon after I got my first job at an engineering firm in Baltimore, while she was venturing into the uncertain world of freelance work. Very quickly, without us having planned it, I became the financial support of the relationship. Her income was unpredictable. There were months when she earned well from a residential project, and others when she could barely cover basic expenses, running from one networking event to another in search of opportunities that might never materialize. I didn't mind covering most of the expenses. We had rented an apartment together in downtown Baltimore. 6 months after we started dating, the monthly rent was $2,800. Between utility bills, another $300, and grocery shopping, $600, since she insisted on organic food and ordered takeout when she was overworked, my contributions easily reached $3,200 per month. In her best months, her share never exceeded $800. This didn't bother me, because I sincerely believed we were building a future together. She would talk enthusiastically about the business she would open, the high-end clients she would have, the house we would buy, and even the wedding we would one day plan. And I believed her. I saw talent and determination in her, qualities that, in my mind, could only lead her to success. ABA dedicated herself with admirable intensity. She attended design conferences in big cities, took specialized courses in sustainable architecture, and built connections with contractors and developers. None of this was cheap, but she assured me that every expense was a necessary investment to position herself in a competitive market. When she needed $1,500 for a 3-day congress in Chicago or $800 for a course on eco-friendly materials, I simply made the transfer. I trusted her instinct and the vision I believed was ours. Without realizing it, I ended up funding not only ABA's career but also the lifestyle she considered essential for attracting clients: expensive clothes, dinners at trendy restaurants, memberships at exclusive gyms. I justified every expense because I believed it was all part of a shared project. At night, as she worked on the couch with her laptop on her lap and fabric samples scattered everywhere, I would watch her, convinced that my support was an investment, not a one-sided sacrifice. She had a particular way of making me feel indispensable. She said my stability gave her the freedom to take risks and grow without fear. "You are my foundation," she would whisper on Sunday mornings as we planned the week. "I couldn't do any of this without you." And I believed it, truly. For 3 years, I carried this role with pride. While she dreamed of expanding her business, I was already researching engagement rings and calculating how much we could invest in a house once her income stabilized. Our big shared dream was a Mediterranean cruise. We had talked about it countless times since our university days, traveling together along the coasts of Italy and Greece, walking through ancient cities, experiencing something that symbolized a reward for everything we had built. When ABA landed a major contract to design the interior of a new boutique hotel in Harborist, I knew it was the perfect moment. Without telling her, I paid a non-refundable $500 deposit to secure exactly the cruise we had looked at together online so many times. I imagined her reaction when I handed her the documents on our 3rd anniversary. I could picture it in my mind, her moved, hugging me, convinced, as I was, that we were ready for the next step. But shortly after making the reservation, something began to change. It wasn't overnight, but looking back, the signs were there. ABA started coming home later, citing client dinners and networking meetings. She began leaving her phone face down whenever she entered the bedroom and stepping out to the balcony to take calls that, according to her, were about confidential projects. I, completely trusting, thought it was all part of her growth. I assumed she was just expanding her professional network, and that it was positive for her career. I never imagined that phase would mark the silent breaking point that was about to happen. The transformation began subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a light breeze that, at first, goes unnoticed, but over time becomes a constant wind, pushing everything around. At first, it was just small details, social media posts that no longer had anything to do with her work as a designer, but instead featured phrases about freedom, intensity, authenticity, and that romantic notion of living in the moment, something she'd barely mentioned before. What used to be photos of carefully designed interiors or satisfied clients began to mix with images of new bars, art exhibitions in places I didn't even know, and nights out at spots that weren't part of our routine. Each post came with captions in a tone I didn't recognize. Life begins outside your comfort zone. If you don't risk, you don't grow. Routine is the enemy of passion. Whenever I asked about these events, ABA always had a ready answer. Sometimes she said they were professional engagements, other times, that she had gone with her group of designers to network with creative people. At first, I believed her. We had been together for 3 years, and trust had been a solid foundation between us. But that foundation began to crack when the name Logan started appearing in our conversations like a shadow that grew a little larger every day. Logan was a photographer. According to her, he worked with designers to document projects and had a different energy. She talked about him with an enthusiasm she no longer showed for me. She said he had just returned from Costa Rica after shooting a wedding, that he traveled by motorcycle through the Blue Ridge Mountains with his camera hanging from his neck, that he had a wild, free artistic vision that inspired her. Logan says creativity needs constant movement, she commented one night, dropping her bag on the table after a launch event I hadn't even been invited to. He thinks routine is a poison that kills inspiration. That sentence pierced me like a needle, not because of the content, but because of the way she said it. There was admiration in her eyes, a spark I hadn't seen in a long time, as if she had discovered a new language and I had been left speechless. At the same time, our intimacy began to fade, like a flame going out without anyone noticing. Every time I tried to create a moment for just the two of us, she had an excuse. She was tired, stressed, too focused on her career. What used to be long conversations about buying a house, traveling, and starting a family turned into a simple exchange of practical information. What time will you be home? Which day are you free? I can't this weekend. When I tried to rekindle our connection by suggesting short trips, exploring new restaurants, or simply spending time together, she replied that her career was at a decisive moment and she couldn't afford unnecessary breaks. Yet, she always found time for dinners, exhibitions, and events, curiously, always without me. The emotional distance became impossible to ignore. I began to feel like a guest in the story that was once my own. The same woman who used to talk about stability and building a future by my side now praised professionals who lived chaotic lives, but were full of excitement. Maybe we've gotten too comfortable, she said one night while we were having dinner at our usual restaurant. She was looking intently at her phone, scrolling through photos from another one of Logan's trips. Sometimes I feel like we're missing things that could change everything. I tried to be understanding. I suggested we do something different, bring more movement into our relationship. But every proposal of mine seemed pale compared to the colorful world she was imagining. While I talked about a weekend getaway, she dreamed of flights to Europe, creative sessions across the country, and dinners surrounded by people who lived without plans. What I didn't realize at the time, though now it seems obvious, is that ABA was no longer emotionally with me. She stayed in our home for the comfort I represented, financial stability, an organized home, a secure life plan. But in her mind, she was already traveling with Logan and with everything he symbolized for her. The breakup came on a Tuesday. It wasn't a fight, nor an emotional outburst. It was a perfectly calculated scene. We had gone to Amore, our favorite Italian restaurant, the same place where we celebrated anniversaries, achievements, and where, naively, I had planned to hand her the surprise cruise documents. I took care of every detail, our usual table, the cozy corner she loved, white wine, her favorite, and a small folder with the trip itinerary. ABA arrived on time, dressed in one of those elegant outfits she wore when she wanted to impress. But something in her body language made me realize immediately that this would not be an ordinary night. She avoided looking me directly in the eye, twirled her wine glass between her fingers, and seemed to search for words she couldn't find. Yen, we need to talk about us, she finally said, interrupting my story about a new project at work. I felt a pit in my stomach even before hearing what was coming. I've been thinking a lot, she continued. I think it would be better if we were just friends. We've grown in different directions and we don't want the same things anymore. The way she said it disarmed me. There were no tears, no anger, not even sadness, just coldness. 3 years summed up in a single sentence. I think we'd be better off as friends. What are you saying? I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. We spent months planning our future. Then she told me. She had been emotionally involved with Logan for 2 months. The work dinners were, in fact, nights with him. What I thought were professional commitments were moments of connection with someone else. Logan understands my artistic vision in a way you never could, she said, with an emotion I hadn't seen on her face in a long time. He's spontaneous, he lives intensely. With you, everything is so structured, so predictable. I stared at her, trying to recognize in her face the woman I had shared so many plans with. So, while I was building a life with you, you were already giving yourself emotionally to another man, I replied, my throat tight. I wouldn't call that cheating, she retorted, not showing a hint of remorse. We just connected in a way that made me realize what we were missing. You're a good man, Yen, but you're not the man I need at this stage of my life. And, as if all that wasn't enough, she delivered the line that destroyed any shred of respect I might still have had for her. We could still take the cruise together. I know you've already paid the deposit. It would be a shame to waste such a beautiful trip just because we're redefining our relationship. Logan thinks traveling could help us heal the wounds. The way she pronounced redefining made me feel sick. To her, it wasn't even a breakup. It was just a status change from partner to occasional sponsor of her adventures. It was at that moment I understood something that had always been right in front of me, though I had refused to see it. For ABA, I was never an equal partner, but a stable source of financial security, someone who should be grateful for her attention while funding the lifestyle she so enjoyed. You really want me to take you on a romantic cruise after telling me you're in love with another man? I asked, unable to believe the level of audacity. She, with a rehearsed and manipulative tone, replied. It doesn't have to be romantic. We can simply enjoy each other's company and celebrate the good times we've had. You've always been my best friend, above all else. Her ability to completely ignore the damage she had caused me was astounding. As she spoke, she calmly sipped her wine, telling me how she had fallen for another man and still had the audacity to suggest I pay for a vacation during which she'd probably spend her time texting her new love interest from a sunbed funded by my wallet. I took a deep breath and kept my voice steady, despite the anger boiling inside me. Let me see if I understand this correctly, I said calmly. You spent months emotionally cheating on me. You're ending our 3-year relationship for a photographer who, according to you, represents everything I am not. And you still expect me to reward that betrayal by paying for the cruise of our dreams? Her expression of surprise was almost comical, as if she genuinely believed I would accept everything with gratitude. Yen, you're overreacting, she said with an air of superiority. Relationships evolve, and sometimes people realize they're better off as friends. We don't have to throw away all the good things we built. Her level of self-indulgence left me speechless. She had slowly destroyed what we had, while enjoying the financial security I provided, and yet, she still wanted to continue benefiting from everything, offering neither loyalty nor commitment. I looked at her for a long moment. The woman who had shared my bed and my dreams for 3 years no longer existed. Before me stood a complete stranger, someone who had used me as a safety net while seeking more intense thrills elsewhere. You know what, ABA? You're right, I replied with a serenity that visibly unsettled her. We are better off as friends. In fact, you just saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Her confident smile faltered for the first time. It was clear she expected tears, pleading, or a desperate reaction, not this firm calmness. I picked up my wallet, left enough money for both meals and a generous tip. I stood up and said, Enjoy your new adventure with Logan. I hope he's everything you believe I'm not. I left that restaurant with a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if a door to an invisible prison I'd been locked in without realizing had been opened. Instead of going back to the apartment we shared, I drove straight to my colleague Derek's house and asked if I could crash on his couch for a few days while I sorted my things out. That very same night, while ABA was probably celebrating her newfound freedom with Logan, I returned to the apartment, packed only the essentials, and moved out without any drama. I left a simple note on the kitchen counter. I respect your decision. The lease is in your name, so the place is yours. I'll cover my share of the bills until the end of the month. There were no confrontations or dramatic scenes, just a clean and rational conclusion, the way I'd always handled things in our relationship. I took a week off from work, something I almost never did, and dedicated it to reconnecting with myself, free from the weight of being someone's financial and emotional provider. For the first time in years, I didn't have to crunch numbers to cover expenses that weren't mine, nor worry about someone else's impulsive purchases. The feeling of relief was overwhelming, almost liberating. I started climbing again at the local gym, one of my passions I'd set aside when ABA complained that my active weekends interfered with her social events and networking opportunities. Feeling the physical exertion, tackling challenging routes, and focusing on each movement restored a vitality that had been dormant for far too long. I also took my old camera out of the closet and began exploring the architecture and harbors of Baltimore, rediscovering my joy for photography, something I'd abandoned while dedicating all my energy to supporting her creative ambitions and neglecting my own. During those days of personal rebuilding, I tackled the practical aspects of the separation one by one. I closed our joint bank account after transferring her share. I removed her name from my car insurance and paid the penalty for breaking the lease early by myself. I preferred to shoulder the cost rather than have to coordinate anything with someone to whom I no longer had any emotional ties. But the most liberating thing of all was cutting contact completely. I blocked her number, removed her from all social media, and asked our mutual friends not to tell me anything about her life. It wasn't revenge, it was self-care. She had made it clear that I was disposable. Now, it was my turn to prove that my peace didn't depend on her presence. Shortly after, I attended an engineering conference downtown. It was there that I met Sophie, a landscape architect from a firm that frequently collaborated with civil engineers on municipal projects. She was brilliant, good-humored, and, above all, transparent, nothing like the emotional manipulation and financial dependency that had marked my previous relationship. What started as a conversation about sustainable urban planning naturally evolved into small weekend trips to state parks in Maryland, where we shared deep conversations and a genuine enthusiasm for our passions. It was in this environment, far from ABA's shadow, that I rediscovered not only what I deserved but also who I was when I wasn't propping someone else up. Sophie valued aspects of my personality that others might have mocked or criticized. To her, my logical way of thinking, my obsession with careful planning, and my steadiness weren't flaws to be fixed, they were virtues that provided structure and security to life. She saw me as stable, reliable, someone you could lean on without fear that everything would collapse overnight. ABA, on the other hand, blinded by the allure of adventure, chose to bet on what she believed was passion, freedom, and boundless excitement, Logan. He represented the exact opposite of me, and in her mind, that's what she needed to feel alive. What she hadn't imagined is that initial enthusiasm would vanish almost as quickly as morning dew, once reality set in. She soon discovered that being with Logan wasn't an endless journey of adrenaline and romantic escapades, but a real relationship with responsibilities, mutual support, and consistency. Her fantasy began to crumble. Logan never had any intention of financially supporting anyone. His bohemian life as an independent photographer seemed charming in theory, but it was far from stable. For him, splitting a last-minute dinner after a photo shoot or taking off on a trip with limited funds could be exciting. For ABA, this quickly became unsustainable. She had grown accustomed to the comfort of having someone, me, who, without needing to be asked, covered most of her expenses and maintained a lifestyle she could never have afforded on her own. It didn't take long for the shine ABA saw in Logan to begin to fade. Just 6 weeks after they made their relationship official, he started to gradually pull away. Messages became less frequent, plans were cancelled, promises remained empty. That initial intensity, which ABA had mistaken for true love, dissolved, leaving her in a constant state of anxiety, trying to rekindle a fire that no longer existed. The supreme irony, she herself had destroyed what was stable and lasting with me to chase a fleeting illusion. And, as if life had decided to collect the full payment, her career also began to crumble. ABA's professional profile, once synonymous with sophistication, started to deteriorate with every impulsive post. Instead of showcasing only elegant projects, her social media filled with emotional outpourings and vague posts about men who don't understand sensitive souls, mixed with sweeping critiques of masculinity. These outbursts sat right alongside photos of expensive furniture and luxurious spaces, creating a contradictory and unprofessional image. Clients, who once saw her as a talented and reliable designer, began to doubt her. After all, no one wants to entrust the renovation of their own home to someone who publicly broadcasts emotional instability. And it was during this same period that ABA made one of the costliest mistakes of her life. She quit the administrative job she had at an architecture firm after Logan promised they would travel together, that they'd create an artistic project in partnership, and that she could dedicate herself solely to creating. None of that happened. Financial reality hit her hard. Logan wasn't in a position to support her, and her freelance income evaporated as her professional reputation plummeted. Even her circle of friends began to drift away. No one wants to be the person who listens, every weekend, to the same drama told with different words. Why doesn't he call me? Why doesn't he seek me out? What did I do wrong? 2 months after our breakup, when the fantasy could no longer sustain itself, the digital smoke signals began to appear. First, there were likes on old photos, immediate views of my stories, small gestures disguised as coincidences. When she realized I wasn't reacting, she moved to the next stage: direct messages, some full of dramatic apologies, others with sentimental demands disguised as heartfelt outpourings. "I know I hurt you, but we shared something real for 3 years," she wrote one night using a mutual friend's account, after I'd blocked all her profiles. "You can't pretend that means nothing. I'm going through a very difficult time and I need someone who understands me." By that point, I already knew her financial situation was dire. Logan had never promised her support, and she had built a relationship on a house of cards. With no steady income, clients pulling away, and without her usual safety net of people willing to rescue her, she began to despair. And that despair only grew when she discovered, using her own surveillance tactics on social media, that I was seeing Sophie. That was the spark that ignited her most intense campaign, an emotional crusade to try and reclaim what, in her distorted mind, was still hers. She started writing to me more frequently, created fake accounts to see my posts, and tried to use mutual friends as intermediaries until finally, on a Thursday morning, she crossed every line. She showed up unannounced at the reception of the engineering firm where I worked in downtown Baltimore. Somehow, to this day I don't know how, she convinced the security guard that she was my fiancée and that she was there to deliver the lunch I had forgotten. The receptionist called me, visibly uncomfortable, saying there was a distraught woman insisting on seeing me urgently. When I went down, I found ABA pacing back and forth on the marble floor of the lobby. Her gaze was distant, her clothes were wrinkled, her makeup was smudged, and her phone was shaking in her hands. She looked as though she hadn't slept in days. As soon as she saw me, she rushed toward me like someone grabbing at the last chance to save something. "Yen, thank God," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been trying to talk to you for weeks. We need to talk about us, about everything that happened." I kept my composure and took a deep breath. I knew several colleagues were watching from a distance, near the elevators. "There is no us anymore, ABA," I replied firmly. "You made that clear when you chose Logan." Her expression collapsed. She began to stammer out justifications, saying Logan was manipulative, that he wasn't who he said he was, that he only used her for a few weeks and disappeared when real problems arose. "You would never have done that to me," she sobbed. "You wanted something lasting, something real." It was almost grotesque to hear her lament being used, when what she had done to me was exactly the same. I didn't need to say that out loud. It wasn't necessary. My silence was enough. I made it clear that what she had experienced with Logan had nothing to do with me, and I asked her to leave before I called security. That's when all her desperation turned into fury. She screamed so loudly the entire lobby fell silent. "You owe me that cruise," she shouted. "I invested 3 years of my life building a future with you. You can't just leave me like this over a mistake." She wasn't screaming for love, she was screaming because she finally realized she had lost her source of stability. The security, the comfort, everything she had taken for granted. Her tone wasn't that of a remorseful woman, but of someone convinced she had the right to continue benefiting from what I had built through hard work. In that instant, it became clear to everyone present that she wasn't seeking any kind of reconciliation. She only wanted to regain access to the comfort I had provided her for years. I will never forget the desperate tone with which she screamed. "I deserve that vacation more than some stranger you barely know." The security guards were already approaching when ABA attempted one final gesture to reclaim something she had lost long ago. "Sophie is just a rebound," she said, between tears and anger. "You're making a mistake by choosing a stranger over the deep history we share." "She doesn't know you like I do," she yelled, as the security agents firmly, but without aggression, escorted her toward the exit. "You'll regret this when you realize what you're throwing away for a woman who doesn't understand what we built." Several people witnessed the scene: my project manager, 2 clients waiting for a meeting, and several colleagues. That public spectacle revealed with clarity what many had only suspected: the manipulation and the unbridled sense of entitlement ABA had carried for so long. For me, it was a moment of vindication. Those who had doubted my side of the story could see with their own eyes that I wasn't exaggerating. She lived in a world distorted by her own selfishness. The story spread quickly through our social circle. People who had previously given her the benefit of the doubt immediately understood why I maintained a strict zero-contact policy. Her attempt at reconciliation was no longer seen as a romantic gesture but as something pathetic. Derek, my colleague, the one who had witnessed part of her manipulative behavior, couldn't contain his laughter when we had a few beers that weekend. "She really thought she could just waltz back into your life as if nothing had happened," he said, amused. "As if you were just waiting for her to finish her adventure with the photographer." What ABA didn't understand was that her big public scene didn't have the effect she'd hoped for. On the contrary, it only confirmed that ending that relationship had been one of the best decisions of my life. When I told Sophie what had happened, she didn't react with jealousy or insecurity. Her first concern was whether the incident had affected my work. "She seems like someone incapable of facing the consequences of her own decisions," she commented, with a rational serenity that made me admire her even more. "It's a good thing you realized that before things between you got any more serious." 3 months after that office incident, Sophie and I were standing at the Baltimore cruise terminal, bags packed, hearts full of anticipation. The Mediterranean cruise, which I had originally planned for a relationship that never deserved such a gesture, would now be an experience shared with someone who truly valued what we had. Sophie insisted on splitting all the additional expenses: excursions, special dinners, activities. That attitude of balance and partnership stood in stark contrast to the way ABA had always treated our relationship, seeing me as a bottomless well of financial and emotional support. As we were checking in our luggage, I heard a familiar voice behind me, shrill, desperate, and loaded with contained hysteria. "Yen, wait, please." I turned around and saw ABA pushing her way through the crowd. Her appearance shocked me. She had lost a significant amount of weight. Her clothes hung loosely on her, her hair was disheveled, as if she had spent the whole night tossing and turning. I later found out she had spent weeks researching cruise departure times and stalking our social media posts until she found a way to intercept us before boarding. "I can't believe you're really doing this," she said between gasps, exhausted from running from the parking lot. "You're taking her to all the places we dreamed of visiting together." Her eyes had that dangerous mix of desperation and anger that made several passengers step back. Sophie, beside me, remained serene, observing everything with the same analytical gaze of someone watching a documentary on dysfunctional behavior. I took a deep breath and spoke in the same tone I use when a client demands the impossible. "This isn't your cruise, ABA. You ended our relationship. You were the one who chose Logan over the life we were building." That's when she broke down and began a frantic monologue. She said Logan had been emotionally abusive and controlling, that he had isolated her and made her dependent on him. She cried as she stated I had been the best thing that ever happened to her and that I owed her a second chance for our 3 years together. "You would have never treated me like that. You always wanted to build something real with me. The irony was that everything she said about Logan was exactly what she had done to me, using me as financial support while investing her emotions elsewhere. But arguing with someone so entrenched in their own narrative would have been cruel and completely pointless. "I'm sorry for what Logan did to you," I replied sincerely. "But our story ended the night you chose him. Sophie and I are building something new. You need to respect that." It was as if her last defenses crumbled. What followed was a total meltdown, drawing the attention of dozens of passengers and Port Authority staff. "You can't do this to me," she screamed, her voice echoing throughout the terminal. "I gave you the best years of my life. You owe me more than this." The security guards reappeared, moving in quickly, as Sophie and I walked hand in hand toward the boarding queue. I didn't look back, not out of indifference, but because that chapter was truly closed. When we passed through the checkpoint and boarded the ship, a serene silence enveloped me. It wasn't the silence of doubt or guilt, but the deep peace that comes when you know you've made the right decision. Sophie rested her head on my shoulder as the ship prepared to depart. Outside, the bustle of the harbor faded into the distance, along with a story that no longer had any power over me. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel the weight of looking back. Only the sincere will to move forward.
Reddit Relics comment. The classic come back to me now that everything's gone wrong. Pity the ship of emotional dependency has already sailed, and guess what? She wasn't on the passenger list.